Well, let's talk about negative gearing. We know he was going to be asked about it here. I'll go through the answers for you. I've seen those reports. We value the public service. What we're doing is the legislation we have before the Senate. Treasury do a range of proposals.
Yeah. Well,
So what do you think?
I think right now this yarn's a beat up. That's what I think. So unless they can prove it's actually being, the journalist concerned can prove it's an actual serious consideration of government, it ain't happening. Now, what I think might be happening is Jim Chalmers is road testing it, but Anthony Albanese ain't on board. That's the way I see it at the moment. And Jim Chalmers has wanted to reform negative gearing since he was in Parliament, if not before, since he was Chief of Staff to Wayne Swan.
That's right.
In fact, I once did an FOI on advice from Treasury on changes to negative gearing and capital gains tax to the Treasurer. And there were so many documents, they said it will take us too long to process them all. So I think this is a regular kite from Jim Chalmers. Yep. He has a look at it. And, you know, maybe eventually you'll win the day, but we're so far from that at the moment, it's not funny. They need to do something bold. The only way you could get away with this is if you did it on multiple properties, which I think makes sense. We're talking about people who have 20 properties. That's right. And then you have to hypothecate the money back to the taxpayer through tax cuts or some other tax measure. The difficulty for these guys is they want to keep going to spending, and that fuels inflation. And, you know, they don't want to do tax cuts at the higher end, yet they want to take money off the higher. I mean, people negatively gear now because tax is so high at the higher end. So, look, I don't think there's enough fuel in this yarn at the moment. And I don't think it's being seriously looked at the moment. But I'm not ruling out that towards the election, it's something they'll consider because they need something bold.
Yeah.
But they need to show the benefit in it other than a tax and spend strategy.
That's
because
right.
a tax and spend strategy is not going to win this election. Now, we know they're looking for money for a bigger childcare subsidy.
Sure.
We know they're going to do that. That will be popular. I don't think it'll win them an election, though. They need to do something along the stage 3 tax cuts line, but bigger and better, and they need a rate cut. I mean, they're in a world of pain, the government. Let's face it. If your primary vote's at 31, and the Reserve Bank governor's out there yesterday saying there's no rate cut for ages, and your low inflation number today is BS, then you are in trouble. And these guys are in trouble at the moment.
That's exactly what Michelle Bullock said yesterday. You can have your headline inflation, but we're not looking at that. We're looking at underlying inflation. So all these measures you've done on energy rebates, we're looking right through them, and it's artificial.
Well, I think it's really interesting. I mean, Jim Chalmers has set up this press conference process to take some of the blame off the government on interest rates. Is it working?
Nope.
No, it's not working because the governor gets up every time and says there's too much government spending. So it's backfiring. And it just ends up in a blame game and natural tension between the governor and the treasurer, even though the Prime Minister and treasurer appointed
Well, it strikes me with this negative gearing story and the timing of it, Andrew. We're getting close into the election cycle, you know, speculation season. Absolutely, we're getting there. But this is compounded. And I haven't really seen a lead up to an election like this because of the lack of reform, the lack of, you know, bold ideas from this government, where usually in a first term, in the second year, you take some risks because you can. This government has not taken any risks in the middle of a cost of living crisis where housing is central.
You can't if you don't have a margin. They don't have a margin.
Well,
so
sure.
We're talking about Tony Abbott, took some risks, had about 85, 90 seats. Kevin Rudd had about 83, 85 seats, so went the mining tax.
Yep.
These guys only have 78 seats, and they're sliding backwards in the polls. So that's basically the reason for that. But there has to come a time where you have to say, oh, well, victory or death. A little bit. Yeah, what's the point of view? And I think that's where Jim Chalmers is at, but the Prime Minister isn't, to be honest with you. I think Jim Chalmers wants to reform negative gearing, always has, always will, but realises it's politically very difficult. Now, when in opposition, as I revealed on air this morning, Chalmers came to the leadership team with a proposal on stage 3 tax cuts to split it into 3, the coalition proposal. A third he wanted for tax cuts at the lower end, or tax cuts generally. A third he wanted for consolidated revenue, and a third he wanted for spending on policies, and he was rebuffed. So we know even before the stage 3 tax cut changes, Jim Chalmers again flew a kite, and that kite involved taking the stage 3 tax cuts and putting them in consolidated revenue, which anyone would call political madness, by the way. So my hypothesis on this is Jim Chalmers out with the kite again. He loves flying a kite. He likes a bit of wind in the air. Here he goes. He's asked for advice. That's it. The PM at the moment, at least, ain't backing it. He'd need to be convinced, as would the cabinet, that it would work electorally.
Well,
that it
he
would be
was
saleable.
eventually convinced on stage 3 tax cuts, though. So
That's absolutely right. But
it's fertile ground there.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
he floats all sorts of things. Like they wouldn't even, I reckon he's been floating this for 3 years, to be honest.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. And you're right, Underwayne's one too. Let me just quickly want to ask you about the Coles and Woolies thing, because, Anthony Albanese is loving talking about this at the moment. A little bit rich, though, I got to say. We're doing something about supermarket reform and the duopoly. No, you're not. You sat on that report, and he even said we've got an exposure draft. I mean, that's not action. He also criticised the previous government for having a voluntary code of conduct. I think that was fair enough at the time. Now they want a mandatory one. They're chasing Nationals policy. The Nationals and the Coalition are way ahead on this.
Craig Emerson recommended it. I mean, they're just responding to the Emerson
The report
review.
was ages ago.
Yeah.
What are they doing?
So they were always going to do it. They just took a while to get to it. I don't think it means a damn thing, this issue, to be honest with you. The only thing that means anything at the moment is a rate cut and inflation coming down. And you can get out for as many Coles and Woolies press conferences as you want. It ain't going to shift a vote until they see rates cut. And Michelle Bullock just gave them the worst news in the world yesterday. She said, even if your inflation figure is low yesterday, it's a fake figure. I thought it was extraordinary, the RBA statement and the comments by Michelle Bullock. I mean, Michelle Bullock and Jim Chalmers had breakfast for an hour in Sydney last Wednesday, and this is what we get out of it? I mean, did Jim take her to a cheap place? I mean, I think it's a stunning story. As a journalist, a good story, but a terrible story for Australians. I mean, there's no vote of confidence in the budget strategy there at all. Fertile ground for the opposition. They have been going on, and you've seen it on your program every day for like 1 or 2 years, saying these guys spend too much, these guys spend too much. Well, now it's starting to bite.